Yo, Josh, yo. So I've had this camera for about 6 months now. I have used it on a ton of projects. I've been shooting on the 6K version, fully built out with all the peripherals, and I can honestly say that the Ronin 4D is an insanely useful and well thought out camera with some trade-offs. While those trade-offs to one set of professionals may seem like a deal breaker, to another set is a huge advantage and leverages what this camera excels in: package size, rigging, and collaborative work. Who is this camera for? What can this camera do? And more importantly, how can you get the most out of this camera? Kind of want to get one passing you guys. But there's a reason why filmmakers at the top see the immense value and are predicting what I can assume is a new ecosystem of products to come.
Dude, that looks sick.
Whoa. That looks insane.
If you're a single run and gun shooter and one camera is all you have, this is probably not the camera for you. If you're a team though, and you work a lot and you shoot prolifically, and you're constantly running and gunning and shooting different things, then this is probably something you should take a look at. And I think that's what DJI is going for here. They're trying to get it built out as quickly and as efficiently as possible so you can shoot more content and you can start working with teams. I just got the box yesterday and inside is the new case. So, excuse me. TSA locks on this thing. All right, this is pretty dope. With the DL lens, this whole camera package is about 11 pounds, which is definitely heavy, but if you consider, if you were to build out the system with a regular 6K camera, you're probably looking at the same weight. On one hand, you could just build out your own Sony a7S III or Blackmagic rig, but on the other hand, DJI did it all for you. And what they did is actually really, really good, and it works really well within some of the limitations. Big elephant in the room, ProRes RAW is no longer gonna be included in this camera. They tell us this now, no ProRes RAW, like now, like as of this week?
Strategery.
This is because of Red's patent over internal compressed RAW. And now DJI is going to replace that with ProRes 4444 XQ. According to Apple white papers, visually indistinguishable to uncompressed RAW. It's just the file sizes are gonna be bigger. ProRes RAW is like half the size of 4444 XQ. Is this a deal breaker for you? For me, no, because I never shot on ProRes RAW. All of the crazy shoots that I went on, not a single one was ProRes RAW. Why don't I shoot on ProRes RAW? Because for me, ProRes RAW is stupid. In order to shoot on ProRes RAW would mean I would have to send it through Media Encoder or some third-party app, convert it into a file format that DaVinci Resolve can grade. Now they did slash $400 off the price, so maybe ProRes RAW is still an option in the future, maybe as a licensing deal. Inspire 2 had some sort of licensing where you could purchase Cinema DNG or ProRes RAW. So I don't know, I'm speculating here. You know what? Don't even do ProRes. Let's just license out B-RAW. Give the people what they want. We want 6K B-RAW in this camera so that we can grade it in DaVinci Resolve. Take away ProRes RAW, that's totally fine, but can you please allow this to record 6K so that we can record these massive file sizes and not lose the shirt off of our backs? You can use your own very fast SSD. Right here I have a Samsung T7. Currently you're limited to record 4K ProRes 422. If you try to shoot 6K, you need the proprietary drive, which are a little expensive. So who is this camera for? I think this camera is really good for car commercial shoots, guerrilla filmmaking, and music videos. You have a bunch of locations, you don't have a large crew, you need versatility, you need a system that's essentially already built out and prepped for you, one that connects instantly. The true potential of this camera didn't hit me until the first night we rigged it up on the car mount. It was incredible what just two guys could film in such a short amount of time. What's crazier is no one even noticed we had the camera rigged up to the car. So in terms of guerrilla filmmaking, mission accomplished. If you have the autofocus on, the footage is a little bit more wobbly because it's catching more wind, but also you're limited to how high you can go. This is the highest we can go, whereas if it's off, we can tip it all the way up. Due to the drag factor at high speeds, we learned removing the autofocus module and pulling focus manually on the DL lenses gave us the best results for car shots. 50mm ended up being our favorite lens choice. We also learned that once we upgraded the car's suspension system, the results were improved once again. When built out in a Tesla Plaid with a Tilta-Hydra Alien, the results were mind-blowing. And in my opinion, outlined the strongest use case for this camera, high-speed car-to-car shots. You know, a really big question for me was, why did DJI release this camera to content creators like ourselves, but then not have it available to purchase for like 6 months? And I think the reason is because DJI really wanted to get it right, and there's a lot of moving components in this camera where it could go wrong. And before we could get out of second gear, we had our first casualty.
What the fuck?
Not that I'm the least bit surprised.
It seems fine. It just.
I actually think DJI was counting on someone like me to point out the flaws.
I hope we didn't hit his car. Oh fuck! You know what I mean? We're hanging out right there.
I was thinking about.
We got super lucky because it's just a couple of screws that are stripped. We can rethread this and we're good. I don't know how I'm gonna explain this to DJI. Like, they're just gonna get this thing back in a box. Actually, you know what? This is good. Yeah, I'm glad this happened because
You can tell them.
yeah, you can just tell them to put thicker bolts in there. This thing is gonna rise up out of the desk and it's just gonna be like a smoldering mass. And I've just completely destroyed it. I haven't even got any beauty shots of this yet. Ask Peter Lindgren to borrow his, text him a photo.
Asking for a friend. How do you put an X9?
If a friend of mine happened to also have it.
Let's be honest, I'm probably the guy to find those things. After that first little mess up, DJI fixed that. We haven't had any of those issues since, and we put some seriously heavy glass on there. If you want to go heavy, you have to add a rear counterweight. The screws are on the back of the gimbal. It adds an extra 300 grams to the backside. So with this plate, the heaviest lenses that I was able to mount and have full control over the gimbal is the Sirui 50mm T2.9. In terms of fourth axis stabilization, I wanted to see what the limit was. We were blown away with the stabilization of the fourth axis on the DL lenses, stabilizing running shots even with the 50mm. But I wanted to see what focal length and lens weight we could put on there before it no longer worked. On the bottom of the Ronin 4D, there are downward sensors, and that's actually measuring the distance to the ground, and that's how it's counteracting with that fourth axis stabilization. Up to a certain focal length, it works really well. It takes out the step. But I wanted to see how much further it could go, like at what millimeter is it useless. Next, we tried walking with the Sirui 50mm 1.6 anamorphic, which weighs in at 2.2 pounds. This is the heaviest lens we can mount to the gimbal and utilize all 4 axes. And the results were pretty amazing, though not too surprising as the relative field of view at 1.6 times is the equivalent to a 31mm lens. So next we tested longer focal lengths, 85mm Zeiss Batis, same results. Then we moved up to Canon 90mm macro. I love this lens for these shots, very sharp, lightweight, and affordable. Though if I were to do it again, I would recommend the Sony version to utilize the focus control, which I believe is Sony's sharpest lens. So normally I ride my one wheel around trying to get those smooth shots, but now it takes out that bounce entirely. You can just walk it. So there is a little bit of technique to get the smoothest results with a long lens. If you point it straight forward and walk that way, parallel with the subject, you get a little bit of left-right movement. But if you point it straight forward and then you hit the lock button and then you turn, the camera ends up staying that exact position, and then you can walk. You end up getting much smoother shots because every step it's taking out that bounce. It's using the 4-axis not only to counteract the movement, but to absorb any vibration as well, especially with the longer lenses. With shorter lenses, it doesn't really matter. So I'm definitely impressed. It's stabilizing 90mm macro lens. Let's see how much higher it can go. This is the Sony G Master 135. So this Sony lens is the second heaviest lens we've tried, but given its barrel length and focal length, it may be the most difficult lens to use. While you can use it for 3-axis gimbal shots, autofocus, or tracking shots, the 4th-axis walking shot is the real test, and it seems it proved too much. We then tested the same lens on the Sony a7S III equipped with active stabilization mounted on an RS2 gimbal, and the Ronin 4D 4-axis stabilization was better. Perhaps with a slow ninja walk, you could still get usable results. But is it the focal length or the weight? So we grabbed the Olympus Zuiko 135 and performed the same test. And you know what? This vintage lens works great. Same focal length, much lighter, smaller package. A walking parallax shot at 135mm, no one wheel or segue required. This could be very useful in the future for me. Without a doubt, the DL lenses are the best in terms of gimbal stability. With smaller, wider lenses, it works amazing. This is probably the widest lens I've shot on. This is the Laowa 9mm Dream lens. Filming on this looks like you're floating. It is extremely fast. It looks like an FPV drone. And that's whether you're running or if it's on a car mount. Obviously, using a very heavy anamorphic lens like this, the gimbal is not gonna work as good as it works with the DL lenses. You know, I think if you're a DP and you're trying to find an interesting look, you know, lenses like the Helios 44 M2, those are gonna be great with the autofocus. It's the right focal length. There's a ton of vintage glass that are about this size that are even rehoused and have gears on it, and they're not even that expensive. Like, vintage glass is cheap. I think you have a ton of options and flexibility there within the constraint of it being under 950 grams for the gimbal to work. If you compare to Sony's phase detection or Canon's dual pixel autofocus, the science is completely different. Lidar system works on physically measuring items in real time and bouncing that information back. An example of this is filming in the mirror. If you film a subject in the mirror with Canon or Sony, it will pull focus from the subject in the mirror. Whereas on the Lidar, it will bounce the Lidar signal off of the metal behind the glass and it won't be able to focus the subject in the mirror. On the flip side, the autofocus can also work with vintage lenses, manual lenses, anamorphic lenses, and it can even work in the dark, but it can't fit all my lenses. It can fit about 70% of my lenses. I think the biggest limitation here is just the range. You can't really use a telephoto lens on here with autofocus. The Lidar system doesn't read anything past 25, 30 feet. You know, I think 50mm is probably the sweet spot with autofocus. If you do manual focus, you can shoot whatever length you want.
Let's go ahead and... I mean, it's doing a pretty good job. We're shooting on the Suray 50mm 1.6 stretch anamorphic lens. It's tracking me and autofocus, and it's looking pretty good. So this is Ben. He's never been here before. Got some dope lenses. Let's see what he's got.
This thing is a monster.
This is a Lidar autofocus. It's an advanced version of the one I did on the RS2. It now works with E-mount lenses.
That's insane.
And it also has a really responsive focus motor that can work with these guys. So this is the old one, right? So this one is a single point. These two eyeballs here focus the little pulses of light to a single point in the center of the screen. So if you think about it in terms of autofocus, this is 41,000. So it's sending a whole grid of Lidar, and it's actually giving us a depth map. What makes this lens so freaking amazing?
I think for Leica in general, they're pretty sought after because in the vintage lens world, they kind of sit between, they're not quite modern, but they're not like fully vintage. So you're gonna get a lot of character out of the lens, but they're still sharp enough. And so if you want to use them on a commercial, you can.
Sharp with character.
Yeah.
Wow, this is only $1,800. For some reason, I thought that this was $8,000 or $9,000.
There's a 1.4 version, so the F2s are.
Oh, I see. I invited him over for the F2. Let's give these vintage lenses some autofocus. 90mm. Dude, that's pretty sick. And then check this out. This thing just pops in. Look at that. It's
already working. You can even see the depth map right here. So we can tell where it's pulling focus from. See if you can, let's go calibrate this for autofocus, yeah?
Okay.
So just like the RS2 3D focus point, essentially what he's doing is he's moving the camera so the LiDAR sensor is bouncing those little packets of light off of the wall, and then he's tuning in the focus manually with his hand. 5 or 6 points, you want to do minimum focusing distance as well as infinity. And then it figures it out from there. Out of the 3 areas of this camera that are most impressive, the wireless transmission is by far the most impressive. Range.
I think it's 20,000 feet.
That's nearly 6 kilometers.
You want to test it?
All right, so Ollie and Ben are across, they're down at the end of the street and about to cross the street. So now, and we can see this image doesn't look bad.
So we're on the Ronin 4D, and we've walked at least 3 football fields, like 4 blocks. This thing still has transmission.
Oh, the image is now starting to break apart.
So I think we actually made it like 2,000 feet before the transmission started to cut out.
All right, so let's put up the drone and just see how far away they are. That's seriously impressive. What's more impressive is I could have been pulling focus from Video Village the entire time. When you think about it that way, it's not just viewing the monitor, it's now actually having control that far away with latent-free video signal. It's kind of wild. What we're seeing is DJI now flexing with their obviously capable drone line and the technology used to control drones now being put into the cinema camera. So what I love most about this setup are the buttons. There are plenty of quick access buttons. On the grips you have tracking, then you have exposure, you have regular mode, and then you have your peaking, which you can customize and change. Then you have hidden buttons, like these guys on the inside here. I swear I've been shooting on this for 6 months and I just found these the other day. You have autofocus and you have sport mode. So if you need to do like a whip pan, there it is. These ones are great because if you give your first AC the grips, these ones can trigger peaking, LUT, and exposure, and these ones can access all of the controls within the camera very, very quickly. Recently, filming this infamous Bel Air compound for primetime television, I brought my normal real estate camera setup and the Ronin 4D and split the day in half with each. Not having to dig through the menu is ideal for television shoots, but the built-in 9-stop ND really stole the show. This function makes it an exceptional camera for real estate, particularly when filming with wide-angle lenses that are too wide for front-mounted ND filters. Now, despite the weight being more or less the same, the Ronin 4D did feel more comfortable over several hours of shooting due to the variety of handles and positions you can hold the camera. And the ease of using just one battery to power everything and not having a jumble of cords everywhere was refreshing and made things a lot easier. The high brightness monitor was especially helpful as everything I shoot was in log and needed to be exposed properly in Rec 709. And the stabilization made the dream lens look even more dreamy, the illusion of floating through the place. And I think the next step is to stick it in the drone and figure out what that looks like. So we wanted to test out the range of the wireless system, but also how the gimbal could handle the 135 while in a drone. This would go down as the longest and fastest lens I've ever put in the Matrice 600. And both systems worked well, despite having no communication with one another. I don't actually think this camera is meant for the drone for the simple reason that it doesn't have a GPS module inside of it. Unless DJI has a firmware update that allows it to tap into the Matrice 600, I don't know that you're gonna have a lot of success with that. For example, the Ronin 2 has a GPS module in there, and it'll help determine the acceleration, and it'll counteract the horizontal drift. In the drone footage, the drone is pitched like this, and the camera is trying to compensate as much as it can, but it doesn't know that it's flying 45 miles, southwest, and it doesn't know to compensate the camera. Now, the autofocus over the last few months with the updates DJI has released, I am very impressed with just how far it's come. The science between the two different types of like phase detection and Lidar, there are some distinct differences that make phase detection more reliable, but I don't know if that will always be the case. I think DJI may have some tricks up their sleeve. They may be able to do some sort of combination of contrast detection and Lidar in the future. I mean, they already have contrast detection in their drones, right? And they just released a new update for the Sony mount, and that one is working really, really well. But there are a few little minor things where it's not 100%. I think the main reason why anyone would be interested in this camera is the rigging. You can literally rig this to multiple applications, to a car, a drone, to a person, and the setup time is cut down to almost nothing. Given the strength of the gimbal use, as well as the latency-free, ridiculous range of the wireless transmitter, it's a very, very powerful option. A lot of time on set is spent rigging and bringing on technicians to balance gimbals and such. So as long as you're using lighter lenses, you have a powerhouse camera here that will allow you to move between scenes very quickly and very efficiently. It wasn't until I brought it on set and was watching legit filmmakers see how they process this camera and take it all in and what kind of questions they were asking, that I kind of understood where DJI was going with this, the entire ecosystem, and started getting excited about the future. I mean, if you think about it, there's only 5 native lenses for this camera yet. The most exciting things, I don't think I can really talk about. I mean, I can kind of speculate, but I don't really know. But I would say the biggest thing that I think everyone has overlooked, why would DJI possibly engineer these to detach? Yeah, bigger picture.
My name is Lidar.
Ground support can take over. Raised forces spotted. Interstate 1 10 south of Dodger Stadium.